Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at 5 major bombshells that emerged during the preliminary hearing. If Suzanne was shot with a tranquilizer dart, it reinforces the notion of a carefully executed crime. It wasn't a spontaneous act, it was premeditated, and that is what Barry Morphew is charged with. Her attacker did not wish to take her on in a wrestling match, nor did he want screaming or noises, including the sound of a gun or rifle shot. I'm less sure whether he was trying to prevent spilling of blood though. I'll explain more about that in a moment. Now, there is some disagreement between the prosecutor, the FBI agent, and also the defense on whether the likelihood that Barry chased Suzanne with his tranquilizer gun. The phone data seems to indicate that. The defense have argued that that's impossible. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to emphasize is this money motive that is being resuscitated here. We know that they said 80% of the arguments were about money. Well, what is quite interesting is even the defense are saying there was a money motive here, this time from Suzanne. But we'll get to that in more detail a little bit later. I do think that money, that is to say greed, likely featured as one of her killer's top priorities. Over $70,000 was missing from the safe in the home at the time of the incident. Obviously, Barry has no idea what happened to that, just as he has no idea what happened to Suzanne. It would be interesting to have confirmation about whose money that was. It would be good if one could snap one's fingers and just know who that money actually belonged to. I wonder who could tell us that. I wonder if that is possible to determine. Then the second major bombshell that came out of this preliminary hearing, besides that $70,000 missing, were these phone pings that were so erratic, and it sort of sparks the imagination. It makes one wonder, was Barry running around? And it gives one a sense of kind of compassion for Suzanne if that was the case. It must have been horrible. It must have been terrifying if she was fighting to stay conscious after having been darted, if that is what happened. Now, according to former FBI agent Jonathan Grusing, Barry moved around quickly and erratically, and because of his statement that he was chasing chipmunks, Grusing assumed, he inferred, that Barry chased Suzanne. If Suzanne was shot with a tranquilizer dart, she would have been surprised and shocked and tried to flee. I mean, wouldn't you? If you were in that situation, wouldn't you do the same thing? It would have taken several seconds, perhaps even minutes, for the serum to take effect. During that time, she possibly tried to escape, possibly tried to get away from her attacker, her assailant. But as time went on, she would have become increasingly immobile, probably increasingly drowsy. If this scenario did play out, Suzanne may have lost her life due to the dose of the serum itself or due to asphyxiation. So that's one thing. Without the remains, we can't really say what was this dose. Was it something for a bear or what? A cow? What was this dose? And I wonder whether any traces were found on the cap in the dryer that could possibly indicate what it likely was, because I think that is quite an important question. Barry's defense team, however, have rubbished this notion, saying that the pings indicated he was moving through walls at 42 miles per hour. In any event, I wonder what the defense's explanation is for his phone moving when it was. Was he driving a dirt bike through the home, or swinging from the chandeliers Tarzan style? Something I'm not clear about is exactly what time all of this happened. If you do know that, let me know in the comments. And then just think about the phone moving at that time. Does that actually make sense? The third bombshell, Barry stopped at 5 separate trash receptacles prior to noon on May 10th. Now, you know what, of these three that I've mentioned so far, I'm not sure which one is the biggest, which one is the most explosive, which one is the most appalling. I mean, all of this is really horrifying. It's dreadful. It is pretty terrible, wouldn't you say? So in terms of this these visits to the trash receptacles, it's also 5 separate trash receptacles, not 5 visits to 5 receptacles, which makes it that much more suspicious. According to Denver CBS Local, and there's a quote from the article, I'll put a link to the article in the description, quote, in total he stopped at 5 separate trash receptacles before noon. He told investigators he couldn't recall what he had thrown away. Now, end quote. Now, if you think Chris Watts was daft during his sermon on the porch, if you think his story was unbelievable, not credible, if he was a bad liar, well, this is even dumber. Barry doesn't even have the nous to come up with a story. He doesn't even have an explanation for why that happened. It almost makes one wonder, did he not know that they would catch him, going to these trash receptacles? Because how can you have a good explanation to visiting 5 different trash receptacles within hours of Suzanne disappearing? Another quote from that article from CBS Local, quote, in 10 interviews with Barry, the only thing we could get him to move on was his tranquilizer material from his garage. He couldn't say which trash run they were disposed in, said Grusing, end quote. Phew, 10 interviews, that's a lot. It also shows, I think, that he admitted removing tranquilizer material from his garage. That brings us to the 4th point. So what did happen to Suzanne? Now, I hate to draw inferences, especially in this area, especially without the discovery, but what may be relevant is an intertextuality related to the number of those trash bags and possibly dumpster trips that Barry took. The fact that he went to dumpsters 5 times suggests that there were at least 5 trash bags. Do you agree with that? And so if you take the Patrick Frazee case, Frazee's mistress, Crystal Kenny, was summoned to the scene, and she basically pulled on the equivalent of a hazmat suit, according to her. And over the course of several hours, she said she filled up 6 trash bags with soiled toys, cloths, clothes, and rags, right? And I'm sorry to say this, but I think the number of trash bags and the timing of the trips strongly points to something dreadful. I think limbs may have been removed. I think that was always going to be, unfortunately, going to be a possibility, given Suzanne's husband's experience in field dressing animals that he hunted. I think there's some photos of that as well online. I also think the smell of chlorine was meant to mask odors and possibly destroy DNA evidence. And in this regard, there's some quite interesting information. That was a key insight in the Patrick Frazee case that Suzanne's killer perhaps paid attention to, the fact that bleach can destroy DNA evidence. And I've provided a screenshot of an article in the Denver Post specifically referring to that. And this is an article from November 2019, and it refers to something that came up in the trial, that bleach can destroy DNA. Did somebody pay attention to that? Bear in mind the Patrick Frazee murder trial predated Suzanne's disappearance by less than 6 months, and the location of that murder was less than 50 miles away from Salida as the crow flies. As such, it's possible, and I believe even likely, that Suzanne's killer learned from Patrick Frazee's mistakes, and one might argue successfully, given the fact that her remains haven't been found. And that brings us to the 5th bombshell, the defense's case. The defense believed that Suzanne ran off. Curiously, the defense case is that Suzanne took the money. That's why I say their motive is money, just as I think the prosecutor's motive is that as well. It's kind of the mirror image. So their case is that Suzanne took the money, took that $70,000 and ran off. But when she ran off, she forgot to run to Jeff, and somehow in her haste, her bicycle bounced by itself out of the garage behind her, along with her helmet. Do the defense believe Suzanne is holed up somewhere, watching her own murder trial, reading about her daughters, while contentedly munching popcorn somewhere? So I do think Barry's defense are going to pull out all the stops. They're going to do everything they can do to mount a strident defense. But it does also at the same time look like the prosecution have got a really strong case. And it also is quite strange. I mean, just those 5 dumpster trips makes one wonder, couldn't he have been arrested a lot earlier? Couldn't he have been charged a lot sooner? What do you guys think? Okay, I'm not going to take it any further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.